So, first one, do you foresee President Clinton and President Obama entering the fray as surrogates to prominently support Biden, given the threat that Trump has posed to our democracy and to their own legacies?
Yes, I think they both will be vigorously campaigning for Biden. I think Obama has been very cautious about using his voice. He's entered into the equation only once or twice when it was really clearly something that he felt strongly about and he wanted to speak to. But I am almost certain that he will be out on the campaign trail and helping. Bill Clinton loves to politic and loves campaigning, so that he'll be doing events too. But I think they both will be careful about using their voices because they certainly don't want to upstage Biden, and neither do they want, they don't want the issue to become, well, what failures did you have as president, and why should we be listening to you? And clearly President Clinton would have some accountability and things that he would have to talk about that might be a little bit difficult. So I think they will pick and choose where they campaign, but I can't imagine that the Biden campaign won't want to use them strategically in the right places. Both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are enormously popular in the African American community, and one thing that I think is very critical for the Democratic ticket is to have a very strong African American turnout in this election. That's going to be critical to winning the national campaign. So I suspect both of them will be used a lot in certain kinds of communities, probably a lot in minority communities. But they will be, they'll be in it, and they both. I think both of them. I mean, they're careful about what they say about Trump, but I think they both feel pretty strongly that Donald Trump has disgraced the office that they held, and they want to do something about that. And I think that's why they'll probably be pretty vigorous in campaigning.
Could you foresee a situation in which Hillary Clinton would lend her voice to the Biden campaign?
Oh yes, I mean she will be another natural surrogate, and she does well in certain kinds of audiences too. But I'm sure she will be campaigning vigorously for Biden as well. Look, you cannot find a Democrat anywhere in Washington or anywhere in the United States probably who doesn't want to defeat Donald Trump. There's a very, very strong unanimous view that we really need, to make a change in the White House, and we got to get rid of the current president. So I think there'll be a fairly unified effort on behalf of Joe Biden.
Okay. So typically during these talks, I know Steve tries to keep them very nonpartisan. We would like for all people to feel like they have a voice here, but I'll just apologize in advance. Some of the questions are not very nonpartisan. So this is not a question posed by the American Club. How has the Trump White House been able to survive with a parade of spokespeople who have consistently lied, misled, and or were absent from commenting to the media?
Well, in the spirit of being nonpartisan, they have survived because there is an important element that they communicate, which is anti-establishment perspectives. A lot of people believe that our political system is broken, that politicians are up to no good, that the institutions of our democracy have failed us. And I think that they play to that theme. Trump, is deliberately anti-political, deliberately does the things that a conventional politician would not necessarily do, because he's sending the signal that I'm a different kind of leader, and I'm not going to fall in with the elites and fall in with the establishment and do what the establishment conventionally would want you to do. He's kind of works against that theme, and that has appeal. Now the question is, how much appeal does it have? It clearly appeals strongly to a very base group of voters who have been strongly in favor of Trump and continue to be strongly in favor of Trump. But what is that number? It's 39 to 45%, probably somewhere in that range, that will strongly support him. You know, the problem is it takes 50% plus to win. And does he have a strategy that actually is going to play to that? Now, the question, which I don't want to duck the direct question, it is really remarkably hurtful to our democracy when, you know, the people who are in official roles and official capacity deliberately mislead the American people. When they know something's not true, but they say it anyhow, or when they try to convince people something is true that's just simply not true. And there have been instances of that, and I think we are paying some price for that because it further erodes confidence that people need to have that their leadership is shooting straight with them. And I think it is regretful that we've had instances of that happening during this administration, and frankly happening a lot, and happening out of the mouth of the president himself, who just, you know, says stuff that is just demonstrably untrue. We all pay a price for that eventually, and I think that is one of the serious issues that we will confront during this campaign. So then, Steve, let me do a test there. Was that gentle and bipartisan?
You're usually a little stronger when we talk on
so this kind of naturally segues into our next question. So if Trump is not reelected in November, how do you see this White House press function being changed? How could you repair it? You know, I think it's kind of, people think it's kind of broken now. What could happen what steps could be taken?
Well, I think earlier in our chat, I described that process that you go through to deal with the media every day. I mean, it is by definition an adversarial relationship. You know, the press corps is there to represent the American people, to hold the powerful accountable. In the famous words of a great humorist, that we're here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And so, I mean, the press sees that as its role, that they are there to kind of nag and badger and, you know, whittle away at those that are pompous, and to try to scratch away to get to the truth of things. I mean, they see that as their role. And on the other side of the equation, most White Houses and White House press secretaries and presidents want to try to put the best foot forward. They want to put their message out. They want to, you know, try to get people convinced that they're leading the country in the right direction. So you've got, you know, a bit of a mismatch in what the relationship is. But, you know, I found that even though it was a very adversarial relationship, it could be an amicable relationship if everyone treated each other professionally. I mean, I had a great deal of respect for the reporters at the White House, you know, maybe with one or two exceptions, but, you know, I generally thought that they were very high quality journalists. They were at the top of their profession. I enjoyed working with them, getting answers to questions. You know, I enjoyed socializing with them. We'd go out when we were traveling around the world, we'd go out and have dinners, which were always off the record because there was a fair amount of wine drinking involved. But you know, there was a socialization there where everybody got to know each other better, and that has just not happened in recent White Houses, and frankly, not just in Trump's White House. I mean, I think there was a very brittle relationship between the White House press corps and some of the people who worked for President Obama. They got into a lot of scuffles from time to time. But I would hope that under Biden, and I know some of Biden's communications folks and people who will probably end up, you know, if he becomes president, will work in, you know, high-level communications jobs in that White House. And I think by and large, the press trusts them and will work with them. And, you know, they'll have their dust-ups from time to time, but I think it'll be a much more amicable relationship.
Okay, so another question related to the function of press secretary. While you were press secretary for Clinton, what were some of your favorite policies of his to announce, or what were some of your best moments to get in front of the podium and talk to the American people?
Well, the things that I like, I mean, Bill Clinton was just insatiably curious about everything and would know things, you know, sometimes you would sort of scratch your head and say, how did he know that? You know, and reflecting some of that. So when I could say, you know, the president was just talking the other day about such and such, and you know, and some of the reporters would say, are you kidding me? And said, no, he, you know, he knew all about this or that. Even, you know, baseball, he would, you know, actually his big thing was college basketball, and he loved watching college basketball. And he would, I mean, he could have been a color commentator on ESPN. Just because he just, you know, knew the sport so well and knew the players. So reflecting some of that from time to time. But I would say that the work that we did that I was the most proud of, but it never came to fruition because we got caught up with the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. But it was, he really worked hard on race relations in this country. He had a panel of experts. We had a commission on race relations that produced actually a pretty good report at the end of the day. And it was something that was very heartfelt for him because of his own background growing up in the South, growing up in Arkansas, where he had to interact with African-American folks all the time. And he had, you know, sometimes people joke that Bill Clinton was our first Black president. And it was only because of his affinity for the African-American community. So when we were talking about the work that our race commission did, some of the policies that he enacted that really helped advance African-American communities, I mean, those were the things that I felt I was very proud to stand up and talk about. The flip side of that question is sometimes you had to, you know, bite your tongue when there was something that happened that you did not think was the right policy. And one example of that was Clinton, for a lot of different reasons in 1996, signed what was then called the Defense of Marriage Act, which was basically an anti-gay piece of legislation that, you know, was going to try to, you know, limit the ability of gay Americans to be married. And he had his reasons for doing that. And I won't go into what the rationale was, but one of the interesting things is how quickly public opinion on that issue changed. I mean, that's now, it's kind of, you know, you look back on it and say, well, how could Clinton have been against gay marriage? Well, it was 1996, and the public opinion on that issue was very, very different then than what it is now.
Okay, so you just touched upon race. So one of the questions from the gallery is, in light of George Floyd's death recently, and then previously the Central Park race row and the obvious social, economic, racial inequalities and COVID-19 deaths, what kind of role do you think race relations are going to play in 2020?
Well, I referenced a little bit of that earlier in the call. I think it's absolutely critical for, you know, for Biden, if you are a Biden partisan, and for the Democratic campaign to really demonstrate that they are going to be effective in speaking to the needs of the African American community. I think there are many Black Americans who sometimes believe that the Democrats have taken them, you know, just taken advantage of them. Have taken, you know, they say all the right things and smile, and then they don't really follow through with action. I think voters in African American communities and minority communities generally, I think this is probably true of Hispanic voters as well. They're really going to want to know what specific things are going to happen as a result of some of the policies that you're articulating during the campaign, and they're going to want to see some evidence that you're going to follow through on it. And we need that. We have got a badly frayed political culture. We've got in our society a lot of divisions and polarization that exist across political lines, across race lines, across economic lines. And, I think the need to bring this country together and to feel positive about the direction that we're going and what future that we can build, that's going to be a central question in this campaign. And it's going to be something that I think people are going to want to see real responses to. And all of these incidences that have happened recently, I mean, violence against African-American people, sometimes brutality by our law enforcement, things that we've seen just on our news, in the last several days are deeply troubling to people. And they want to see some clear, real responses. And that they'll be looking for the people that they believe will really do that.
Okay. So we have several questions on the two campaigns' views on events in Asia, going on in Asia. So first one, in light of Pompeo's recent remarks regarding Hong Kong's loss of autonomy, where do you think U.S.-China relations are headed, and what role will those play in the upcoming election?
Well, unfortunately, I know that is a issue that is very much on the minds of everybody probably on this call because of where you are and what you probably do. In general, foreign policy tends to take a back seat during our presidential campaigns. We don't contest the presidency very often around, foreign policy issues unless there's some crisis, unless there's something that's happened. Now, I think most Americans understand that the U.S.-China relationship is vital, and it is probably very proximately involved with what the contest for influence is going to look like. I think most Americans want to believe that we are still the leader of the free world. And they understand that there is competition now, and particularly competition in Asia with China. And there have been some, the U.S.-China relationship is probably at a very low point right now, and seems to be by certain decisions happening, capable of going even lower. And I think that could emerge as an issue if people see that there are very, very real consequences. And I think part of that will depend on what happens in the real world. What actions does China take over the course of the coming year to exert greater influence in Asia and maybe elsewhere in the world? China has become a major player in Africa, doing a lot of things there to exert influence. So they are certainly demonstrating that they want to be considered a rival superpower to the United States of America, and China probably already is that. So that could play out, and it certainly will get, there'll be questions about that during the debates, but whether that becomes a voting factor for most Americans is something that I would have questions about at this point, unless there is some real incident or real crisis that triggers greater public attention to that.
Do you think both
parties? Dan, I'm going to give myself a quick plug. I got a commentary, I think, unless something happens tonight, coming out in the Straits Times tomorrow morning, answering this question. So I'm not going to. Let's keep the questions going to Mike, but I'll answer this in the Straits Times tomorrow.
Oh, okay. So we'll get off China. Steve's got that handled apparently, Mike. So next question. Let's see. Could the following two factors end up favoring Trump come November? One, low enthusiasm factor for Biden among young voters, and the persistent moderate progressive split in the Democratic camp. Second is the possibility that come election time, the U.S. economy could be trending up if the COVID-19 pandemic eases, which Trump will most likely play to his benefit.
Very, very good questions. Yes, that Biden has got to do something to inspire the voting age 18 to 35. Turnout in that demographic is historically kind of low anyhow. Under Obama's success in part was because he actually did do better in that age bracket than previous national candidates had done. But, you know, Biden has got to do some things that make him a little more cool when it comes to younger voters. And, you know, I think probably the campaign understands that, and they're going to have to address that. I mean, how you build momentum and how you get excitement and how you pull people out to vote, that really is one of the real important part of the mechanics of a national campaign. And, you know, there are things that you can do. There are television shows that you can go on. There are signals that you can send that sort of say, look, I'm a more hip guy than you think. And Biden is going to have to do some things like that. The second part of that question, yes, I think if we see a recovery in the national economy, which is, you know, with the levels of unemployment we have right now, is pretty devastating. But if there's a sense that the comeback is happening, that we are recovering, that the economy is regaining some of its strength, by the time we get to November, that will certainly be very important to Donald Trump's interests. If we are still stuck in the very high levels of unemployment and the economic situation we find ourselves in now, that's going to be very, very hard for Trump to overcome. You know, who knows? I mean, the predictions that you see from economists and others right now is that this could be a very deep and long-lasting recession that we're in, and that recovery might take, you know, months, if not, you know, years. But you know, we will see. But if you begin to see better, more favorable reports about how the U.S. economy is coming back in the third quarter and looking good for the fourth quarter, then that certainly is going to play to Trump's benefit.
All right. So getting back to Biden establishing some sort of hipster credibility, could a VP pick help him in that area? And if you were a gambling man, who would you handicap as his VP pick?
Well, that's the great parlor game going on in Washington right now, and it's, you know, he's obviously shortened the list by saying that he will pick a female. So you go to that list. There's been some commentary here in our press about how Kamala Harris might do herself well by taking herself out of the vice presidential sweepstakes in order to be that person who gets appointed to be the first Black female Supreme Court justice. So there's been some speculation on that. Amy Klobuchar, this U.S. Senator from Minnesota, has been almost actively campaigning for the job, and, you know, is clearly being vetted. We're in that process now where the campaigns really have to scrub the profiles of each of the likely candidates, and they're doing that now. A lot of people think because Elizabeth Warren really captured the attention of a lot of people, including some of the younger voters that we've been talking about, that she might be a good choice. You know, I honestly don't know. I mean, I think Biden, you know, Biden's experience is that the most important quality is to someone that will be able to work well with him personally as president. So I think it's going to come down to personal chemistry. And he's, you know, at some point he's going to talk one-on-one with all of these women who he's considering. And then probably the one that he feels like I really clicked with her, that will be the choice. If I were a betting man, I think it would be Klobuchar. But, you know, I don't have any real insight on where that's going to happen. And the real question is, how long do you string this out? Because it's going to be, it becomes increasingly the only thing that the political press wants to talk about, because it, becomes the great question. And, I'll do a quick story. I worked in the 1988 campaign. I worked for Lloyd Bentsen, who was the vice presidential running mate for Michael Dukakis when Dukakis ran for president. And the choice of the vice president ends up making very little difference in the political equation. I mean, we didn't carry Texas because Lloyd Bentsen was on the ticket. Interestingly, Bentsen was also simultaneously running for re-election to the U.S. Senate, and he won by a huge landslide running for U.S. Senate, but he couldn't do anything to help carry Texas for the Democratic ticket. So you don't make this decision very much based on what you think the political calculations are of who's going to do the best for you in this state, or will you carry this state because you've got this person on the ticket. It really has a lot more to do with the decision that you make and the qualities that you look for, and the choice you make is really the important thing. It's like it's the choice itself that then says something about the presidential candidate. How did you make the choice? What was the rationale? The process that you use to pick the person, that becomes really the salient political factor, as opposed to, who's going to balance out the ticket, or who's going to help us carry this state or that state.
Hey, Dan, why don't we do two more?
Standing by your pick from 2 weeks ago?
Well, mine was Whitmer. I still like Whitmer. I think having a governor who can take Trump straight on when it comes to coronavirus, and that is a good contrast for this election, assuming that she can have that relationship with Biden. I think that if they don't click, it doesn't work. But assuming she does, I think you can help.
I did not mention Governor Whitmer, but I think she's really, really emerged as a pretty interesting personality, and I could easily see her being maybe one of the dark horse candidates for vice president that emerges.
Okay.
So, two more, Dan.
Yeah, we neglected to mention at the top of the program that Mike is actually broadcasting from Baltimore. He's on a 12-hour time difference, and he's expected to be doing some things today. So as we come up on 8:30 a.m. his time, he's going to need to start getting out and doing those things.
Well, yeah, but this has been very, very enjoyable spending some time with you. So, and I can put off all my daily errands until later. Okay. My wife is walking our dogs right now for the morning walk that I usually take. So we've got it covered.
Okay.
Well, so actually, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead and ask one more.
Okay. Really quick, or not really quick. We have a couple of minutes. This is a complicated topic. It's been a complication for Trump the whole 3 years he's been in office. What do you think a Biden presidency would mean for U.S.-Russia relations?
Well, I mean, that's a topic that probably depends more on Vladimir Putin than it does Joe Biden. Biden is very facile and competent in dealing with issues of foreign policy. I think that the most important question that will be on the table when it comes to U.S.-Russia relations are the arms control agreements that were carefully negotiated and litigated in the 1970s and 80s and have been thrown overboard by Donald Trump and his administration. And I think working back to some agreements on the distribution of arms, theater weapons in Europe, some of the things that kind of derive going way back to the SALT negotiations in the 1970s. I think that will be primarily on the agenda. And again, we were talking about China earlier. Putin has demonstrated that he wants to kind of expand the so-called sphere of influence that Russia has had in that region. We've seen what happened in Crimea. We've seen, other things that are happening in and around the Black Sea, and some of the incursions that Russia has made elsewhere. So I think reestablishing some parameters on that relationship, curbing some of Putin's excess enthusiasm for, restoring imperial Russia, and getting back to the table on these critical arms control agreements, that will be primarily on that agenda. But Putin is he is a very wily character, and has clearly set himself up to be president for life now, through the constitutional changes that they've made recently in Russia. So that will be, again, I mean, the combination of the U.S.-China, U.S.-Russia relationships, and then how the three of those world powers negotiate and deal with some of the major global issues that we face, that will define really what the rest of the century begins to look like in terms of, geopolitics and how the world is going to work. That's a subject for a long discussion.
I'm going to ask the last question, just why don't you tell everybody what you're doing now? It's fascinating what you're doing.
Well, I had my road to Damascus moment. When I got out of the White House, I'll tell the story briefly. I got out of the White House, and the pastor at my Methodist church, we live right across the street from the Methodist church that my wife and I attend. And my senior pastor said, well, we're so glad you're done with that work at the White House, because we have a real job for you now. And I thought I just had a real job. And it turned out that he wanted me to become superintendent of our Sunday school at church. And I was flattered. I said, well, that's an interesting idea. How did you happen to think I should be the right person for that job? And he kind of looked down and he said, we haven't been able to get anyone to do that job for 10 years. So I took it on and realized that if I was going to teach young people anything about Christianity, I better study up on the subject. So I got involved. I took classes at Wesley Theological Seminary, which is our Methodist seminary here in Washington, D.C., and really enjoyed it and got to know some of the folks there. Before too long, I was on the board of governors there, and then I got my master's degree there. And they decided they had a vacancy on the faculty in the area of what we call public theology. How do faith traditions and religion impact public policy? And of course, that kind of fit with my own personal biography and my interests. So I ended up taking on a role at Wesley Theological Seminary as the director of what we call the Center for Public Theology, where we really train seminarians to go out and be better at talking about politics in the church. Sometimes people say, well, religion and politics don't match together very well. But we need to have places where we can have genuine dialogue, and people can express differences without hating each other. And in my mind, churches are a place where we can accomplish that kind of work. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm training people to kind of go out and make the church a more positive location for genuine political dialogue.
Oh, fascinating.
Well, yes, Mike, Dan, thanks for organizing this, and Alan, thanks for doing it. And Mike, really great to have you here virtually anyway in Singapore.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to someday coming back and being with you all in person.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. And if not in person, maybe we'll do this one more time in the fall as well.
Great.
Yeah. On behalf of the American Club, the American Association of Singapore, and the American Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore, whose members are all in attendance. It's been great, super fascinating. And thank you for your insights into how you see the world as it is.
Well, good luck to all of you, and thank you for the work that all of the combined agencies, the Chamber and others are doing there. I know that you're a very positive force in the economy of Singapore and actually throughout Asia. So I commend the work that a lot of you on the call have been doing.
Okay.
Again, Mike, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you next week.
Good being with you.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Steve.